Good evening. You're listening live to the Extreme Movie Show. Tonight's episode, Kickin' It. I'm your host, Rob, here with RDV. It's Top 10 Tuesday here on the Extreme. RDV. Canon Classic Alert. We're doing Over the Top 1987 with Sylvester Stallone. This movie's incredible.
We are kicking it, girl.
That's
We're
right.
kicking it back to the 80s.
Man, this movie brings up so many memories, and Canon Classic, so it's an instant must watch for anybody out there, young, old, or even if you hate it, love it, whatever. Go check this movie out again. I want to read to you the description of this movie, and then I'm going to go back to the old days and give you my initial perspective here too. So we're kind of just doing a little stream of consciousness, as it were, here. But this movie is free on YouTube Movies in glorious, at least 720 HD. And it's funny when you talk about this movie that there's just, it's an arm wrestling movie. You're like, oh my God, is it really an arm wrestling movie? And you're like, yeah, it is. And actually, there was one like a year or two earlier than this that had nobody in it. But Stallone was involved in this movie. He kind of co-wrote it, whatever. I guess they would do things different with it. But he got like 12, 13 mil for it. So he's just making serious bank. Cobra's getting ready to come out. We all know about his success with Rocky films. But this movie is just, oh my God. I hate it and I love it so much. I can't. The only way that would describe it is just me doing a cold read of the way YouTube Movies, if you go there, would describe it. It goes a little something like this. Some fight for money. Some fight for glory. He's fighting for his son's love. Sylvester Stallone blends action with sentimentality in this family action drama as struggling trucker Lincoln Hawk, who, following the death of his estranged wife, strives to rebuild his life. Although he tries to make amends with the son he left years earlier, the boy wants little to do with his father until Lincoln enters the national arm wrestling competition in Las Vegas. Wow, sounds like shit. But you know what? It doesn't matter. Everything we've talked about since 1985 with Chuck Norris's movie Invasion USA, where everything jumped the shark and became 80s films. This is a perfect example.
I was going to say, I beg to differ. Now it's probably for people who didn't live through the 80s or people who even grew up in the 90s. You think of that description like, wow, that just sounds horrible. But now the 80s was full of sports movies and stuff like this. This is no different.
Yeah.
This is high. It's a high adrenaline. And plus, anybody who knew Stallone was not going to make a bad movie. You know, it's this person. Yes, he likes to put a pen to paper. You know, he didn't Hudson Hawk it. You know.
Well, Hudson Hawk's considered by many to be extremely watchable, and it is on some level. But for arm wrestling, the interesting thing is Stallone's making so much money. He's God in the 80s, can do whatever he wants, and somehow he's involved in doing this film. And I don't know the history behind it, but they had a lot of actual professional athletes in there. So let's talk about something that was extremely important to this movie that Stallone has a history with, and honestly almost no real athletic endeavor cannot be talked about unless we talk about the sport of professional wrestling. So it wasn't until the mid-late 80s that it came out on John Stossel was the reporter who got slapped around by somebody because he said, oh, this wrestling's fake. And Stossel's this guy that's a bit of a libertarian now, but he was a liberal back then, and he thought he was doing something big by blowing the lid off of professional wrestling. And he was a professional or like amateur wrestler, and he got into the ring with this guy, got his ass beat. He learned some of the secrets. This guy bladed on live TV. I remember seeing all this, but for a good 10 years before, you're watching stuff that's got Hulk Hogan in it. Hulk Hogan, of course, was in Rocky III. We remember him as Thunderlips, an incredible role that really catapulted him to stardom. But Stallone always respected other athletes in other fields. He made a movie called Victory about soccer, which is actually a pretty good movie. Michael Caine, Pele's in it, a few others. Very good film. We haven't covered that one yet. But Stallone always really, like I said, had a lot of respect for athletes and even including professional wrestlers. And so in this particular movie, you have Terry Funk in here. He plays like the rich uncle's father's whatever, muscle or whatever.
Yeah, muscle, which is awesome.
Yeah, it was. We'll talk about the scene here. But the thing is that this movie, honestly, I remember watching this with my dad. My dad shaking his head. I could just see the disgust in his eyes, and it was so bad. But he would start laughing and howling at how horrible it was. And it was a fun movie to watch with like your dad or your brother or something. And it's a dopey enough movie where it's not really violent that a kid could really watch it, and you get the basic gist of it. It's a movie for all seasons and for all love interests, if you will, young, old, male, female, whatever.
I gotta disagree. I never really met anybody who said this movie sucked or rolled their eyes at it.
No,
If anything, people are like, they're like, dude, he puts their trucker hat back and you're ready to go. He's gonna kick ass. Like this is
people
Stallone,
were rolling
man.
their eyes in the '80s because you're like, you can't stop the '80s, and the '80s is unstoppable. Like I said, since '85, and so you're like, oh, it's on now. Yeah, he gets the cycle eye vision thing going on with the really bad eyeliner, and boom, it goes in the zone and over the top. But no, the worst thing about this movie is the kid is annoying, but then it's really his voice when he gets excited. Otherwise, he's not horrible, and you're just like, eh. And there's a lot of product placement in here, which. Hey, do you want to talk about the Brute ad now, or do you want to save that?
We can talk about towards the end because
okay, all right.
It's not because we might have to go a little bit detail as far as Brute for those who don't.
Product placements on full display here. So yeah, Stallone plays this loser of a truck driver guy. We don't really know too much about him. And he talks in a voice like this, which makes you want to slap Stallone. Because this movie is stolen by Bull Hurley. Come on. This movie exists because of him. It has nothing to do with Stallone. He makes the movie to me.
Stallone plays a struggling truck driver. He basically arm wrestles on the side to make extra cash. He's trying to rebuild his life. His wife. He's estranged from his wife, and then he also
left her single mom.
Yeah,
started the single mom craze.
Well, we find out that she pretty much gets sick, and then and then I guess I think she passed away like through half of the movie or something. So he's supposed to bond with his kid who's like 12 years old, and his kid just So, the kid's very disrespectful. Like he doesn't really he blames the kid.
Snot-nosed brat that needs his ass kicked.
He blames his dad for his mom's death and stuff and all that stuff. He didn't care about me. You'd rather just go and truck drive and arm wrestle and it's like whatever, old man. He deserved to be slapped across the face just at least once. Not hard, but not to set him straight and say like, hey, it's like you gotta respect your elders, man.
It is unfortunate that in the '80s, military school got soft because this kid would have gotten his ass beat back then before he came out. He would come out proper.
Parents got soft. They're like, instead of disciplining your kid, you just threw him to the military school because you didn't want to deal with him.
Yeah, I'm just saying. I mean, yeah. No, this movie's it's entertaining because you get all the classics pieces. It's almost like a traveling buddy flick too, because he's on the road and he's got his kid. And he's going to Vegas to enter this arm wrestling championship. So along the way, he gets into some duels. And what I liked about this too is ESPN was still actually somewhat small at the time, believe it or not. Disney, of course, didn't own them at that time. Actually, a lot of stuff with sports in the 70s even was on tape delay, or you didn't get the results to the next day unless you're listening to late night radio. So we didn't have all that instantaneous accumulation of information that you do now. So ESPN started to do things and started getting noticed in the 80s for having highlight reels. And so there's a scene here at the end where right before they're having the big arm wrestling competition where they cut to each person talking about stuff. And it's a really nice little shot in there. But no, let's just start with some of our favorite scenes to me. The one scene where Stallone's in the diner and it's like 100 degrees or whatever. Everybody's sweating like a pig. And I call it the Smasher scene. Smasher's this dude that comes out. He's like, hey, you hawk. And he's like, yeah. And his son's ordering like a tuna on rye or something really effeminate at the time, although it's a yummy sandwich. But because he wants to have a steak or whatever. He's like, I got 1,000 says I'll break your arm or whatever. And he's like, you want my money? Come on. And they go to arm wrestle. And it's so hokey. It's so G-rated. And of course, Hawk wins over like that. But the cool thing is Smasher looks at him. He's like, it's a good match. And he shakes his hand, gives him the money. And you're like, cool. But while he's doing that, Bull Hurley just kind of walks in. And when you see this guy, this is the one where, if he walked into you and you're in the men's room, you'd start sucking your thumb. You'd just be going, mama, mama, because he would destroy you. He's got those glasses on. He's got that funky pseudo goatee thing. And he's a massive, massive, massive emphasis on massive individual. And he walks up to the little kid whose back is turned, puts his hand on the kid's hand because the kid's holding his dad's little bit of putty or whatever that he squeezes all the time for grip strength, of course. It's like, what's your father doing here? And it's like, he's supposed to be the bad guy, but he just come across as this big, doughy, intimidating guy. And so to me, that's the problem with this movie. Stallone's supposed to be the good guy, but he's got such a mopey character, but it's the 80s. We can't overrule it. And this is why I get pissed at some of these 80s films. And then this guy's supposed to be the bad dude, but he's the ass carry. He's like, I'm just going to break arms. I drive trucks. That's all I do. And it's like, it's phenomenal, you know, and he's so intimidating here. And I'm like, he's such a goon. And I'm telling you, he makes the movie. So enough of me marking out. You go ahead and talk about that.
I want to address, say hello to Eric Breedens in the comments saying that kid was on General Hospital.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Why do the serial killers only go after hot chicks? Why can't they go after little kids?
Allegedly, we're not promoting this. Yeah. Yeah. Good. Okay. So anyway, when he goes to talk to, you know, he's gonna talk. He goes back. He basically talks to the grandfather, who basically wants because Stallone already gave custody over to of his son over to the kid. Because he, didn't want him, couldn't deal with him. But then he goes back. He's like, well, he's like, you went back in your word. He's like, yeah. So it's like, and then he walks away from the guy. He's like, and he's like, what are they? He's like, Mr. Cutler's not done talking to you. I'm through talking. Just didn't gut punches Terry Funk in the gut, and then pushes him right through the glass door, and then he walks away.
Terry Funk would have destroyed Stallone at any time he wanted to. And you know what? Him flying through that glass window, that's probably one of the easiest bumps that Terry Funk ever had. And if you don't know about Texas-style death matches and all that from back in the day, you don't know Terry Funk.
Dude, wasn't he also in ECW for a while too? The barbed wire matches and all stuff. Him and Cactus Jack.
The WWE. Yeah. Chainsaw Charlie, a bunch of stuff. Yeah.
He's like, I bet you it's probably his idea. It's like, I could go to that table for an extra 10 grand. Go to the door. Go ahead. Give me money. Yeah. Multi-time award arm wrestling champion, future professional wrestler Scott Norton also made an appearance in the film. He was
Scott Norton, an extremely strong individual.
Yeah. And then you also had the wrestlers. Yeah, the extras were real guys he was going against in the championship.
They're all legit.
Yeah. John Vreeland, Cleve Dean, and Andrew Cobra Rhodes, and who actually was the final match referee. And then you had you also had John Brenzick, who also made an appearance in this movie. So it's like there was some authentic as far as the contest. They actually had actual real people who actually do this for a living. Make money off it. But like I said, Stallone is the underdog in this film. Yes, normally you wouldn't think I'm gonna take down this big guy and I'm stronger and just put his arm down. It's like having Rey Mysterio trying to arm wrestle against the Big Show. It ain't gonna work. Yeah. But in this movie, it works because it's Stallone. It's the 80s. You're pumped up. He's got his hat turned backwards. It's the music. To talk about the music, man, you had Sammy Hagar, Winner Takes It All.
Kenny Loggins, who was more than unstoppable for
Eddie Money, I Will Be Strong.
Yeah, I mean, 80s movies really figured out with MTV in the early 80s that you have an attractive soundtrack, it can do wonders with a movie. And like I say, this is more of a music video than it is a movie. And that's not to take anything away with it, because it is a canon classic. That's why we're discussing it. But you mentioned a word I want to touch on here a little bit with something going into one of the other scenes I like. You mentioned authenticity, and we've talked about how in our martial arts films that we like to cover that we prefer, or at least I've said I prefer no wire work. I like it when people have weapons, different kinds, different styles. We just like people that actually know what the hell they're doing, regardless of how good looking they are, perform it. And so, when you get somebody that's a stunt person trying to make a movie like a Scott Adkins or, other people that we've talked about before, Amy Johnston comes to mind, that's kind of neat, but it almost is too breathtaking. Where in the 80s, Chuck Norris, I've always said, had that template where you built up to one particular explosion. And Chuck Norris films and this kind of movie, Over the Top, even though it's about arm wrestling, have the same template in that it starts slow and it builds to a crescendo at the end with one big final scene, a final fight. And I think actually Van Damme movies actually captured that a little bit too, where there was a few other templates that were out there, but the authenticity, having the real guys in there, and these guys, they're 225, 250. I mean, they're massive individuals by any standards. It really helps. You see how small Stallone is compared to these guys.
Stallone versus Vader. That's what it felt like.
Yeah, it's just no, but like I say, this movie is all about Bull Hurley, the guy that's like the 4 or 5 year running champ and all that, and just the lines in here. One thing I can say that's really good about writing, even if they're cheesy, if delivered with authenticity, you don't have to use language. You don't have to be cute. You don't have to be woke and all that. Stuff like Vegas. You ain't got a prayer in Vegas. I mean, it's just unbelievable, because you're like, I believe that guy would snap your arm in half. And so when you have stuff like that in a movie, that's what makes it incredible. Now, that being said, Rocky's one of my favorite movies of all time. I think it's one of the best movies of all time. The boxing in it, while I appreciate what they did, of course, as far as real boxing goes, we know it's not really close to being the same. You can't take that kind of punishment and whatever. That being said, it's not a boxing movie, and that's the whole thing. This is not an arm wrestling movie. It's a movie that has arm wrestling in it. It's really, of course, it's a love story. It's a drama about him gaining back the love of his son, as hokey as it sounds. It's wholesome in that sense, even if it's kind of borderline cheesy. I don't think it's the best Stallone film by all means, but then again, I'm a huge fan of his remake of Get Carter, which is not a good film, but for some reason I find it so stylishly intriguing. I wish he would do another one. But this movie, if you haven't seen it, you got to check it out. You get to the big scene in Vegas, like you said, right after the grandfather there tries to buy him out of his son's life, and that's when he gets determined. Yeah, he's determined to go win the tournament for his son, for his love. Instead of taking the 500 G's, cashing immediately, and then going ahead and winning, trying his luck in the tournament. He's kind of dopey and stupid, and this is why he's supposed to be a white meat baby face, to use an old wrestling term, but it's just poor booking. He goes in there, he gets injured, and there's this great scene. I love it because it's such a cheap shot. It's perfect. Bull Hurley, who by no means comes across as being a cheap bastard in here, he's yelling and screaming, and he headbutts him, and he's like, "You're hurt now. I own you." And it's like, to this day, I'll sit there and say, "You got a prayer in Vegas," if somebody starts talking Vegas. And everyone looks at me in public like, "What the hell are you talking about? Are you autistic?" And I'm just like, "No, you just haven't seen Over the Top." And we're like, "What are you talking about?" Like Stallone, they're like, "Who's that?" But such is the life of being old and not a millennial. You've got to see this movie. I can't stress it enough. I mean, there's some movies like, "Oh, that's a good movie. If you like this, check it out." But it's a canon classic. You've got to see it. It's phenomenal. If you're feeling stupid and dopey, I recommend this either on the front end, maybe on the front end to get you a little bit loose for the next film. But Doctor, to me, this really was one of the films I was thinking for this year's Father's Day movie massacre, like we did with Commando last year. This was going to be mine because it's such a great father-son type of movie. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I want to address quickly before I talk about that. I want to address on Eric saying he sort of sold the brats. Are you talking about Robert Loggia or Stallone? Or who? Because Stallone in this movie, he was selling brutes. And I got to tell you, brutes, those commercials back in the 80s. There was a contest, if you remember, in 1987, for this commercial. Look it up. Look at the brute commercial. You got the woman, as you're talking about brute, it's like the scent of a man that drives a woman insane, wild. She see her dressing up in the man's clothes, everything, and then after that, it's like he says, you could win a chance to get a life a couple not a lifetime supply. It was like a year's supply or brutes, and also a chance to wasn't it also a chance to go see Stallone? Is that what it was? Can't remember what it was. The actual
the thing is, they had so much product placement. A lot of people felt that took away from the movie. And in a way, it was interesting in the mid to late 80s, people that were really hardcore movie critics and films fans, they considered the writing to be a little bit, higher par, of course, than, anybody can be a film critic today. And here you go. But it was funny because a lot of them would be offended at the way movies started changing in the 80s. And we've talked about the 70s really being kind of the high point of movie writing and TV writing, actually. In the 80s, it kind of starts fizzling out. But they said, oh, this movie's it's nothing but nonstop music, and it's sappy, and the kid's annoying, and Stallone mopes about through it while getting paid like 12 to 15 million bucks. It's nothing but product placements. But I want to hit on that magic formula there, because what people don't get is that this was actually the perfect time in the 80s, whether you liked it or not, where everything would hit, and people kind of all figured out in all mediums. If you were a musician, nobody knew who the hell you were, but you had a good video, boom, you were something. If you were somebody who had good videos, all of a sudden you could be a musician. You could do crossover work on television. You could actually be in movies. You could do commercials. It wasn't just for Sports Illustrated models that eventually started going into movies. So the Brute commercial you're talking about, I looked it up, and I have to say I still remember that commercial now that I've seen it, because nobody wore Brute if you were a guy back then. It was your father's aftershave. It was just nothing. It was disgusting. It smelled like, no woman like that.
Are you kidding me? I still wear Brute, bro.
Well, what you do in the Midwest is up to Midwestern ladies, so I can appreciate that you guys might still be 40 years behind, and that's fine. Just wear your head on backwards and go over the top and in the zone. And next time you meet that lady, when there's not 14 inches of snow on the ground, you know what I'm saying?
I don't know, bro. That was a dig, bro.
No, but the whole behind the turning the hat behind getting in the zone, I never liked that. I got to be honest with you. Marky Mark then took that, ran off with it. Then it really quickly went into, instead of the AIDS epidemic being talked about, it was the hats being turned out backwards. Because if you wore a hat in the 80s inside, you would get slapped. I mean, a stranger would walk up to you, a 60-year-old man would walk up to you in the mall if you're wearing your hat on, and the mall would slap you. And now you wear it backwards, total disrespect. I mean, it just totally is. It's just like that scene in Twin Peaks where the father slaps Bobby at the funeral. What? So
if a kid has his hat on inside the house or inside the mall or whatever they said, the stranger comes up and tries to hit me, that old man deserves to be punched in the balls. Sorry.
I'm just saying.
I know it's a different culture back then, but I'm thinking like, there's no reason to put your hands on anybody if you don't even know that person. Wow, I don't like your shirt. I'm gonna punch you.
You can wear your cut-off denim shorts, flip-flops, your mesh half top, as long as your nipples are covered, and you could even have earring, even though you might be called, the F word by older people. As long as you didn't have your hat on backwards, it was just understood that there were certain levels of respect when you would enter somebody's home or a place of public that you would not do, and that would be one of them. And you certainly didn't chew gum, but thankfully Stallone didn't do that. Do you know what would have been a better movie for this? Or no, I don't. Bill Hurley would have been a better movie.
No. If Stallone,
movie I want to see.
Stallone would have been as jacked as he is today, because he was still running off that whole skinny. I'm from Rambo, because he was a skinny.
I'm glad you brought this up, because I have a surprise factoid for you that you do not know about this film, and probably neither do the 99 people who are going to go watch this after they hear us see it. Stallone had finished up filming Rocky, I think 4 at the time, or 3, whatever it was. He had broken his hand, like a bone in there. Yeah. So he wasn't really allowed to use his hand at all. I honestly thought Stallone was left-handed. I might be wrong in that, but in here he's arm wrestling right-handed. I'm just saying. So it's one of those things where he had to make believe he was arm wrestling. He's that good of an actor. So I'm sure he hit the resistance bands, pumping up before each scene with the copious amounts of baby oil and sweat and, the film shots and all that. Because really, you can't have Stallone there with any of these other meatheads. It just doesn't work. But I'm joking when I say all this stuff. I really don't hate the film. I do enjoy it. It's really a bad film, but I enjoy it a lot. And that's one thing that you said about Stallone earlier that I think is absolutely true, that hit or miss, whether Stallone thought it was great or not, or the final cut, it's still watchable. And I'm telling you, if Over the Top came out today, it'd still be better than the Meg. It'd still be better than a lot of the CGI crap that's out there today. It's not an expensive movie. It's very simple, very basic, done very well, and executed very well. What more could you ask for in a film? I don't, and I don't get it today. That's what's sad, that I'm arguing how Over the Top is better than most movies today. What's your take on that?
I'm sorry. I found the trailer for the commercial I was talking about for that. You
Please
can
don't listen at all. Go ahead.
no. It's because I was trying to find this the whole entire time. I'm telling you, but this is Oh, actually, what I'll do is I'll probably post it into the people that are watching the chat. But uh, you could actually win. They actually had their own art competition. So people were competing to be in the movie with Stallone.
Yeah, yeah.
So that was kind of cool. And then and then those people actually so that was kind of cool. The people were because I said I thought they just took like most times they just Hollywood is like, well, I know you're an arm wrestling guy, you're big right now, we're gonna bring in a movie. This is for anybody else, a little guy, underdog, who's nobody's heard of, could actually win. It's like it's over the top.
Unbelievable. Absolutely. It is over the
over top. Yes,
right.
It's an over top to get into the over top.
That's why when we reviewed Chuck Norris films to kind of really highlight the 80s decade that we're so fond of here, not just action movies, but all 80s films. When we got to 1985, Invasion USA, I said this movie's over the top. I mean, that's a direct dig on this movie because to me it starts with that, and this movie basically says, yep, any movie from here on out in the 80s, it's just going to be over the top. It's not like that at all. And that's where I say there's sometimes a lot of smaller movies or different movies in the 80s that don't follow this formula that are actually very good and somewhat artistic. And that's why the 80s is such an interesting decade, because you did have a lot of people trying different things out. So there's a lot of variety, but you had groups of horror movies, you had groups of action movies, you had different types of action movies, you had physical movies, you know, like this one, if you want to call them. You had the shooters. I mean, you had science fiction, fantasy, bad ones. You had so many of them that people that might have only been on TV in the 60s and 70s could find like a late second career in interacting style, you know, on TV or a B-level movie. David Carradine from Kung Fu took the role so seriously, ended up really not doing much, but he floated around in the 80s in a lot of bad B movies like Circle of Iron and stuff until he got recast in the reboot of Kung Fu, or I should say the continuation of it. Same thing with Leave It to Beaver. Got hot again in the 80s. They made another show with Tony Dow and everybody else, I think, for the most part. So just an amazing time to be alive in the 80s and watch a film like this where you go, hey, what's playing now? Hey, let's go see Over the Top. Why? It's a Stallone flick. Okay, I'm on it. Boom. There was no talk. You would just go do it.
Well, like you said, like it brings up, you had Schwarzenegger, you had the 80s with Stallone, Schwarzenegger, you even had Bruce Willis towards the end, you know, making his debut in action films with Die Hard. You had Chuck Norris doing Can Group films, you know. It was the 80s was a time to be for action movies, you know. Even not just action movies. If you even had like the romance movies, like the chick flicks, they weren't as lame as they are now. I mean,
no.
And I hate that people will go look back like the 80s. Well, that was just stupid, you know. It's just thinking like, it's like, did you watch? Did you watch this movie? It's like these people don't even watch, and these people don't watch. They don't watch the movies. They judge it based off what the cover looks like, or you give a description. Well, this sounds stupid. It's like, well, half the crap that's on TV now, that looks and sounds stupid and is stupid. It's
well, the thing too about the 80s, again, living through it was interesting because we you always talk about me being, you know, the 80s guy, you being like the 90s, 2000s guy, and we have other people that, depending on what we're talking about, and when they join us are like that. What?
Rob, it's no secret that you're actually Don Johnson, stunt double. You're in.
Thank you. Place. I appreciate that. And Michael Douglas.
You got a face for radio
great
too.
Hair. Great hair. I do indeed. You might have seen me in print as well, but we won't go there. No, the thing about the 80s movies, again, that I want to take a step back here and highlight is that you hit on something there. I talked about in a joking way about how irritating sometimes this formulaic approach became in the 80s because it's totally disconnected from reality and it lacks a certain sense of authenticity. And I mentioned it's a love-hate with John Hughes films. And I mentioned, of course, Stallone's size. Although I love Stallone, he's an animal and he busts his butt into it. And I respect him totally for it. And I wish more people would do that. And very few do. The thing is in the 80s, you knew it was formulaic. You knew that it was not out of touch with reality. But damn it, it still made you feel good anyway. And that was the whole point, is that you went into these films and the filmmaker said, you know what, if we just do this, We're going to give the audience what they want, and we're going to make money. So let's just do it. Arm wrestling, who cares? Stallone, you're in it. Let's get some guys there. Let's make it a little authentic. Boom, here you go. Done. It took 2 months to make this film. Now you've got no time to release the next James Bond and probably last one, or really there hasn't been one in 10, 12 years. That's been, what, 2 years now? I mean, they should just leak out already. I mean, you and I have talked about new stuff coming out. MGM is looking to sell themselves. Somebody should probably buy that franchise because they're DOA already. It's like this with all these things. By the time the movie comes out, you don't care about it. You're a huge Ghostbusters fan. That movie's been delayed a year and a half. I mean, back then, you could plan a movie and have that thing out within a year. Easy.
It was only delayed a year. It was supposed to come out last year, and then they pushed it back to the same month, but a year later. So as far as right now, it's still coming out in June. Like I said, I'm hyped up to still see it, and I like the fact that what they're doing right now on the actual channel for YouTube, they're actually releasing like the cartoon and all the stuff to get people hyped up and get it watching again, get in the mood. But I'm talking back to this movie. Screenplay was written by none other than Sterling
Stallone.
No. Well, yeah. Stallone too, but I'm talking about Sterling Stallone. Also wrote on In the Heat of the Night.
There you go. A good film. Good show.
So yeah. And we also got story by Gary Conway. No, Brain, we're not talking about Superman. We're not talking about that Gary Conway. Yeah, this Gary Conway also, he was on Burke's Law from 63 to 65. And also he also was in The Land of the Giants from 68 and 70. So it's cool that you actually had like some people actually who knew the business and knew what would sell. And like I said, a lot of movies today, especially this movie, you try to make it, if you take the same script, word for word, everything, and all scene for scene, put it in today's, it wouldn't work. Not because, people would cancel it. No, it's because it's set for an 80s movie. The culture back then, the 80s, was totally different than today's. It just wouldn't work in today's culture.
Okay, but it's a physical thing. Does anybody arm wrestle today? Yeah, no, there's a tour, there's a circuit, but I mean, is anybody even aware of it?
No. Like I said, you'd have to change the sport. It couldn't be arm wrestling. You couldn't even make it pool. You couldn't even do that. You couldn't even do the hustler. You couldn't even do that today.
Money. Yeah.
Yeah, because no one plays pool. Like you said, like as far as sports and all, the biggest things are pretty much, if you do anything, it would still be football, basketball, baseball, and hockey. And you would have to be the only one would work is the fan. That's it.
Well, the late 70s was pretty much like the golden age of bodybuilding. So there was a lot of crossover from people that are bodybuilders. Arnold Schwarzenegger immediately comes to mind. You had other people that Lou Ferrigno, obviously Incredible Hulk, was about 300 pounds, much bigger than Schwarzenegger, but was more of a classic physique rather than what you see today. Even though all people took steroids, what you were judged on was different. You were judged back then on symmetry and balance, the way your body looked, and proportions too, not now just freaky mass, which is a little easier to do. And that you saw a lot of people appreciate the effort that it took to get to be that size when you would work out. And so you take that 70s for the most part type thing, and also professional wrestling, professional sports, and it crossed over in the 80s big time. There were a lot of people. We mentioned Terry Funk in here. Big individual, doesn't look necessarily intimidating when you see him in here. He's got a bit line, but the guy's been around forever. Anybody that knows wrestling knows who he is, unless you're a recent wrestling fan, allegedly. But Schwarzenegger's a good example. Stallone, even, he's really loved sports. You can tell that with Rocky. You can tell that now, and this movie's 10 years after that. So there was something about just physical hard work and hard labor and what it does to you. And we've mentioned all the martial artists before too that do their own stunts, do their own choreography, that are involved in it. There's just something special about, like I said, that in the 80s, where there's a certain honesty and authenticity that comes through because of that. Even if it's scripted, even if it has a happy ending that's completely disconnected from reality, like this film, you didn't care in the 80s because, damn it, it was entertaining, along the way from start to finish. You got your smack talk, you got your larger than life persona or odds to overcome. It's the stupid, dumb, basic, predictable story, but it makes sense, and it's about humans. It's not about superheroes. It's not about aliens. It's not about politics or any sort of stuff that people get all fed up with today, or basically saying let's just remake something from the 80s and flip races and flip sexes, or just try to put a different spin on it. That's totally why a lot of these 80s reboots fail. And I know you've mentioned that a lot with TV ones there too. But for my final thoughts, Over the Top, go watch it. Canon classic. Can't go wrong when it's a Canon film. It's glorious time, very magical in the 80s and 90s and maybe late 70s too with Canon films. We reviewed several of them, and we got a lot more to go. What are your final thoughts on this film?
Yeah, never resort to a RAM rating. You'll go to jail. Especially for a kid who doesn't even want to be with you because he blames you for his mother's death.
You should have arm wrestled that little kid, and maybe we get like a Cobra Kai reboot with this kid that's annoying, and he could end up being the good guy, just misunderstood, and maybe he breaks people's arms arm wrestling. That'd be kind of cool, wouldn't it?
Well, something must have happened to the kid because he ended up in General Hospital after this. I'm still on maybe put him in his place.
You've never heard of Luke and Laura, have you? And I don't mean Laura by itself, because that would be, somebody else. But Luke and Laura.
That was a short-lived TV series, wasn't it?
No, General Hospital's not short-lived, sir. Kids. All right, guys. Thanks for listening. Over the Top, Canon Classic, 1987, I believe. Sylvester Stallone. It's the only time I've ever changed my name. I did say that Shockma, that got over 100 views, was easily one of the best When Animals Attack movies of all time, and also an 80s film. This movie, Over the Top, is one of the best arm wrestling movies of all time. And I don't care if there's only 3 of them or 300, it's still one of the best, and it's because of that great.
Yeah.
And yeah, Eric, I know. We know. All right. Time for some hot chocolate. N-E-S-T-L-E-S.
Yeah, so check this out. Check this out. There are copies on YouTube if you want to watch it on there. You can probably still find it on DVD somewhere at Barnes & Nobles are still around. I don't know if they are. You can also watch it.
TV, I'm guessing, right?
It is on Tubi. That's where I watched it.
So. Okay. And on YouTube, with ads, it says too. But if some of you may have an ad blocker, it plays without them, and great content. So there you go. All right, guys. Thanks for listening, RDV. Thanks for showing up too. I know we've been talking about doing some Stallone flicks for quite some time. We're finally getting back to it. It's really awesome. What a great way to ring in this week with Over the Top. All right. Have a good night, guys. As always, stay extreme.
Extreme!
I own you!